Hello everyone, this is Mike Mavic speaking. I'm going to take you through a series of videos, talk through best practices in creating a BPM process or project based on the case management or master process methodology. So I'm going to start with this first session talking about the actual project structure that I normally use. Now bear in mind, this is not the be all and end all. This is just what I found over time. Works good. It makes people understand the project by looking at the project. It helps you to implement a solution based on some best practices that I've learned over time. We also have some documentation which I will share on our wiki page that explains this in greater detail. So let's start off with the actual project that we have. This example is for a demonstration I did that illustrates the integration of BPM to FHIR, the actual business connect capabilities for healthcare. And I'll go into more detail as I go through the actual solution. So on the side, we can see our project structure. And I just want to highlight all the different assets that I normally build and the reasons I build it like this. So first of all, I have a data project, and this is where we define the data model that is part of the solution. So you can see in my project, I have two different data model projects, and I'll go through each of these in greater detail as I go through. So the data model is where we actually build the data that plays a part of my solution. The next piece that I have that I always build is a forms project. You will see in my forms project I have a number of forms, and the way that I normally do it, I build a form for every one of the cases and the classes that we have, and then I reuse that form in different parts of my business process. So we can see in this case I have an order, I have a patient, a provider, I've got notes, and so forth. And you can see there I've got my provider, my patient, my order, my notes, and so forth. It makes the reusability very good, and it helps you to create something that can be tested and reused, and will actually over time cut out the number of errors that you have in a project. I think it is very important to try and keep structure, to not only make it easy for yourself to manage a project, but also to share and make it readable for other people on the project. In my forms project, I also put in page flows that is used to manage and update the data in my case model. It makes it easy for you to create, especially demonstrations. If everything based on a user interface is one project, it is life-cycled separately. And that's one thing that goes for all of the TIBCO artifacts that we build. The version control that you use, whether it is Microsoft or Subversion or whatever version control it is that you use, the actual files are checked in and out of the version control system, and that is what's versioned. And the reason I set up my project like this, it makes it easier for people to collaborate around a project and multiple people to work on a project. Very importantly, you will see that a process as an XPDL, so everything in that XPDL file, whether you have one process or multiple processes, is versioned at that XPDL level. Okay, so the forms as my page flows, and I'll go into more detail on the details in those itself. So that's my forms project. The next project that I have is a action or case actions. You will see in my case actions again, I have my XPDL file and I have a number of processes in that case action. Very importantly, if you want to work on multiple case actions with different developers, I would also create a different XPDL for each of these case actions. You are not going to be slowed down in execution if you have multiple XPDL files. It's just going to make your life easier to manage and version these separately. Case actions are page flow processes that are sort of CRUD processes that will allow you to change, modify, update, and delete the actual data that is in your data model. So that's my case actions, and I normally call it just actions. So yeah, very importantly, you can see I add a piece on my name so that I can very, very quickly see what the project does that I'm actually looking at. Next, I have my business services. Business services, of course, are where you can trigger processes, capture data, and delete data by using a business process. So in your user interface, you have the place where you can trigger a business service, and this is where you can actually create those business services. If a business service has a parameter, you can call that business service from a URL and initiate a business process, or just capture, update and delete data in a case model. So that's my business services. Next, I have business processes. So in this project of mine, I have two different business process projects. I have my main master process project, and I have a process project that keeps a sub-process for each of my milestones or life cycle events in my solution, and I'll talk a lot more about those. But you can see in my case, I only have one process that manages my sub-processes. In my case, I put everything in one XPDL file, as you can see, but in reality, you could probably put each of those in a separate XPDL file to make it, again, very easy for people to work together and to lifecycle a process separately. I'll talk a lot more about these as we go along. Next, I want to talk about an org model. So in my solution that I'm showing today, I don't have a huge organization model, but very importantly, I think, to note is that an organization model is always a separate project. You never include an organization model artifacts in any of the other projects, because the organization model is lifecycled separately from all the other components in your solution. So that's my organization model project. Next, I have my REST project. A REST project is really just where we create the definition of REST calls that you want to trigger from within business processes. So you can see I've got my REST definition, and I've got my schemas that is responsible for the request and the reply or response of my services. Signal project is where we define the events that takes place in my business process. So I've got a cancel event, and I've got a lipid panel order event. In there, I also have my IDs, which are the correlation fields that I use to trigger those events. And I have a section just for my signal project and my eventing in my solution. I also have an interface project. And this doesn't have to be in a separate project. I just like to put it in a separate project because you might have multiple signals that you want to expose throughout your solution. So I like to actually put that in separately. You will notice that I don't have an deployment artifact like I have in most of my other projects in my solution. You will see that I have my process interface, and I have no actual processes in this project. And this is the template of calling a sub-process. In my case, I try to make it easier so that every single sub-process I use in my solution only requires an order ID. Because from the order ID in my case, you will see that I can get to all the other objects by looking at reference projects and so forth. So that's my interface project. I have a services project and a services BOM file. Okay, in my services project, I put in all my processes that I reuse all over my process. Now, service processes are stateless processes that's not audited, but allows you to actually call as sub-processes to do certain things that you have to repeatedly do in your solution. Samples are searching for cases, finding references to cases, which are these references and links to other actual objects. I also have one for adding notes, which is something that I add in every project of mine. I've got in notes, add notes, sub-process. And then I also have some services that allows me to update my state locations and my state rules. I'll have a section on that separately altogether. I talked about the versioning, and I think that is more or less the entire project structure that I use on a regular basis. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next section.